culturally, we use the word holy casually to express something unusual, unexpected, or just wonky. Right? We say, holy cow! Or sometimes we say, holy guacamole! I say, holy Moses. But there are other things that is not appropriate to say from the pulpit. And that's okay. But aside from those expressions, I was curious what the dictionaries say about the word holy. I was kind of surprised that somehow the word holy is very stuffy in the dictionary. It just permeated with religious connotations, like dedicated or consecrated to God for religious purpose, morally good, sacred. Sound very priestly. I don't know when did the word holy wear a garb. I wore this robe just to say that. Right? In the New Testament, Pharisees, they would sometimes wear this colorful robes and stand in the public places and pray that somehow they're holier than the others. Right? Right? You remember those stories? Yeah, and so just to make that point this morning, I wore this robe. Do I look holier than when I'm not wearing? Since when the word holy wore a holy garb and became so holy? Think about it. I'm just raising some questions. Can people be holy without being religious? What would holiness look like without religious garb, robe? Think about it. It's something that we don't often question. From a biblical perspective, from Hebrew, the word holy in Hebrew is basically set apart. The word holy in Hebrew is set apart. Set apart to do some godly thing. For example, God set apart Jesus to do what God had intended for him to do. Does it make sense? To set apart from the world to do what is God's. Set apart is a little more friendlier, right? It's palatable. You can exist with that word holy with set apart attached to it. All through our Holy Scripture, God called all kinds of people for specific purposes. It was a holy call with a very holy purpose. God had an agenda for those people. For example, God called Isaiah because people had become so unruly. Isaiah was just an ordinary person like you and I, but God had to send somebody who will represent him and speak the truth to power. And so Isaiah went. Isaiah also said he was not adequate. Who is adequate? Who is eloquent? None of us are. Right? And so God said, no worry, I will make that happen. But Isaiah is not the only one who was not friendly to the call of God. Jeremiah, for example, he's known as the crying prophet of the Old Testament. He also hesitated so much. He even said, I am not eloquent to speak for you. And God said, I will put words in your mouth. No worry. And then, of course, if you want to look at the Old New Testament, disciples were all ordinary people. Most of them were just fishers. Right? That's all the business was. And yet, God called them with a very specific purpose to learn from him so that they can teach others. Right? Yeah. Make disciples for the transformation of the world. Our United Methodist mission statement. Well, look at Apostle Paul, for example. He was not the greatest human being as far as his sensitivity towards the religious establishment of the time, right? He was the enemy of the gospel. And yet, when he had this holy encounter with God, his life was transformed, and therefore his mission in life became bring the gospel to the Gentiles. Right? Very specific. Divinely given. And so we have a story about Moses. Moses, at this time in his life, he was not at a good place. Exodus chapter 2 talks about that there was an infraction and Moses got involved and he killed the Egyptian. Remember the story now? And he was running for his life. He fled. He fled and he found a place in Midian. And he found a secure place with Jethro, who was the priest in Midian. And Jethro had a daughter. And Moses married Jethro's daughter, and he became a shepherd. Remember your Sunday school stories? Yep. So from a palace, now he's a shepherd. And then he is out in the wilderness, tending, herding the animals, the flock of his father-in-law. So he was not in a good place. He probably had a lot of time, a lot of free time to wonder and ponder about life. From palace to shepherding. Wondering about what happened to me. Don't you feel that way sometimes? Where am I going? What's happening with me? We wonder. We pace around. We try to write some journals. We write for one day and we forget the next day. Moses in that transitional mode. And so, but then, he learned to care for the flock, to even put his life against the wild animals of the day to protect the flock. To look out and find a better grassy place so that the animals can graze. And so he was at Mount Horeb, Sinai, minding his business, taking care of his father-in-law's sheep. And something happened that had not ever happened in the Old Testament. A bush was on fire. And out of the middle of the bush, a voice came. This bush was blazing, but not consuming. Our text says Moses was curious, and he came by, and the voice of the Lord says, Moses, Moses, don't take another step anymore. For the ground you're standing is holy. Ground you're standing is holy. And therefore take the sandals out of your feet. Feel the presence of God on the ground. The holiness of God. The power of God. Come near. Barefooted. Come without shoes to listen. In my Asian culture, that is what we do. If you see some mosque and people are going into worship, in the narthex, what do you see? Shoes. And then around the mosque, there is something that you may not know. There are faucets. A little stool. Before they enter the mosque, they wash their feet, they wash their hands, they wash their face, and then they go into worship. Come clean to the presence of God. Bring your best to God, is the theology. In my Asian culture, the same thing. If you go to a little church, in the narthex will be shoes. And pastor will come to the pulpit barefooted without socks. For us in the West, we call it our feet is dirty, right? But they come naked to the presence of God and feel the presence of God. Our Pacific Islanders do the same thing. I pastored Pacific Islander congregations for 7 years. And when pastors came to the pulpit to preach, or even just come up to the pulpit, they took their sandals off. That is why a majority of them wear sandals. Because the ground they're walking on is holy. How do you know that? She was a Hawaiian dancer there. So God made it sure that Moses knew the ground he was walking was holy. And then, after all of that wonderful encounter, God just drops a bomb. I don't know how else to tell you. This metaphor of dropping the bomb, right? Something heavy coming down on you. And then God says, well, I've been hearing a lot of prayer from Egypt. My children are in oppression and they're exploited. And somebody's got to go and deliver them, and I'm picking you. Imagine that. I am commissioning you to go to Egypt and deliver my people. Wow. I don't know what he would say. But he did ask 4 questions to God. So, if they ask me, who am I representing? But if I told them God appeared to me, what would I say? And God just said to Moses, when I call people, I don't send them alone. Right? When God calls you, God prepares people out there. You wouldn't be working alone and doing things alone. You will be partnering with somebody. And in this case, God is saying, I'm going with you. I'm partnering with you. You are never going to be alone. That's a good thing to know. And then Moses said, okay. They will ask me, who is this God you're talking about? And God says, just tell them, I am who I am have called you. God of eternity has called, and therefore I am here. And then the third one, well, if I just went and told them, they will not believe me. What do I do? And then God says, what are you holding? And he says, I'm holding a staff. Right? A shepherd's stick, right? And God says, drop it. And he dropped. Do you know what happened? It became a serpent. And then God said, pick it up. I would be running if God told me to pick it up. Whoa. But he did. And it became the staff again. And then the last one, in chapter 4, verse 10, Moses said, like all the others, ordinary people whom God called to represent him, Moses said, God, this is great and wonderful. I just want to remind you with just one thing. I am not very eloquent. He said that too. I'm not eloquent to speak in front of Pharaoh. Are you crazy? I think that's what he's trying to say to God. And God says, no worry. I'll put words in your mouth. Sometimes I feel that when I'm standing up here, I never wanted to be a pastor because I thought someday I'm going to run out of sermons, and I will have no idea what to say. But after 40 years, I'm still standing. I guess there's a lot more to say. See? So, you wonder, how do I say what I say some Sundays? And I go home and I wonder. So, let me bring this to a conclusion. I believe that Moses' wilderness journey, metaphorically speaking, when he was in this deep valley, trying to find himself, looking after his father-in-law's flock, I think he learned leadership in the trenches. Hands-on leadership, executive leadership styles. Because Moses had to learn about visioning. Where do I take my flock next? He planned and he executed. He even looked at how to grow and sustain, and therefore he looked for grassy area where the flock can graze. In the trenches of his life, he learned how to be an effective leader, a good leader, a caring, compassionate person. And out of that situation, God calls him to lead people out of Egypt. Sometimes hurting people is like hurting animals, right? We all say that. And so maybe he learned something to lead God's people from Egypt to the promised land. God calls us for nothing. We should never, ever say, I have nothing to give. I am not eloquent. Well, you're not the only one who will say that. Others have said that. I'm not trained for this. I don't know how to do this. Well, you're not the only one who said that. But when God calls, God gives you a mission. Some of them might be little, but big things stands on the little things, right? Even today, we are standing on the shoulders of all that have gone before us, who came originally to build this place, right? We don't stand alone. We're standing on somebody's shoulder who planted a vision here in this place. So when God calls, it's a holy call. In that holy moment, we are on a holy ground. And we are given a divine purpose. Sometimes people tell me, Pastor Dave, I was just driving by and I saw something and I knew I was supposed to be there, but I stopped and I helped somebody. I went out of my way to help. And then after that, I felt very good. I just felt I've answered somebody's prayer. Right? You have those stories. Those things have happened to all of us. But holiness is not about being smug in church. But holiness is about doing something purposeful. Right? It is not hiding under this garb. It is not hiding under, the four walls of the church and feel good for an hour and a half. But how do we take this holiness, the set of our ministry, back to the world from where we came? How do we translate the holy encounter to holiness sharing? Does it make sense? I think that is what Moses' issue was. That is what Isaiah's was. That is what Jeremiah's was. That is what apostles, and Paul. We all have a mission. What is yours? Did you hear it? Did you sense it? If you did, what are you doing with it? What are you doing with it? Anyway, that's the sermon for the day.